From KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. On air and online, this is Intersection.
Hello and welcome to Intersection, where people and ideas meet, online and on KBIA. I'm Ryan Famuliner. An extraordinary year in the Missouri legislature came to a close last week as the legislature overrode 10 of Governor Jay Nixon's 33 vetoes in its annual veto session, the most veto overrides in the state since 1833. That's not all that surprising, though, with the interesting setup in the state right now, a Democratic governor and Republicans controlling a veto-proof majority in both the state House and Senate. But that veto-proof majority didn't always stick together along party lines in the veto session. There were attempts to override 7 other vetoes that were unsuccessful, including the 2 most high-profile bills of the session, a tax cut bill and a bill that would nullify federal gun laws. Today on the show, we're going to dissect that veto session and talk about what it means going forward, what we learned about the political divisions in our state, and what we can expect next year. Joining us in studio for the discussion today, Democratic Representative Chris Kelly represents Columbia and much of Boone County in the House. He's serving his 9th term in the legislature and is the Minority Caucus Vice Chair. Welcome back to the show, Representative Kelly.
Happy to be here.
Republican Representative T.J. Berry is from Kearney. His district is northeast of Kansas City. He's serving his 2nd term in the House and was the sponsor of House Bill 253, the tax cut bill that was the focus of a lot of debate this year. Representative Berry, thanks for driving in to join us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for asking.
Marvin Overby is a political science professor at the University of Missouri. He followed the veto session closely and will help us put it all into context. Marvin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ryan.
And joining us by Skype, Phil Brooks is the director of the Missouri School of Journalism State Government Reporting Program, otherwise known as Missouri Digital News. He's been covering the state legislature since 1972, so can obviously help us with that context as well. Phil, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
We'd also love to hear from you and our audience. Did anything that happened last week in the veto session surprise you? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. And I think that's a good place to start, that House Bill 253. T.J. Berry, we have you here, the House sponsor of that bill. So why don't we just jump right in? Why weren't Republicans able to muster up enough votes to get that passed, overridden rather?
Well, you could answer that 2 ways. One, we did not have the will to override the governor. Or 2, the governor did a very good job of explaining a few of the problems that were unintended of 253, and that doubt led to the veto being upheld.
Right. And some of those, the governor pushed some issues on things, the way the bill was written, right? There was some language that appeared to probably be accidental, maybe, at least that's the way it was discussed later. Would you have changed much about how it was written?
Sure. I mean, the 3 things that the governor really pointed out this summer were the prescription drug portion of this, which was unintended and was a drafting error. Then there was the textbook issue, and then finally the retroactivity. Those are the 3 points that he really hammered home. My argument would be if I fix those 3 points and put that exact same bill in front of the governor, I think that the outcome would be the same. He would veto it. And we failed this summer to have a true discussion about economic development and how we're going to go about doing that.
Right. Representative Kelly, I know you came out strongly against this bill too during the veto session as well. Was it because of, as Representative Berry's talking about, because of those errors, or was it the larger idea, or a little bit of both?
Certainly both. It was my job to shepherd the opposition to the bill on the House floor. I was very unhappy as a 17-year veteran of the legislature with the quality of the legislation. There was a lot of mistakes in it and a lot of expensive mistakes. The retroactivity issue that T.J. pointed to is alone perhaps as much as $1 billion. I don't think you can go out there with tax legislation with billion-dollar errors in it and expect a different result. Or at least I hope that you wouldn't get a different result. I hope that legislators would defeat any tax bill with $1 billion error.
Representative Berry, can you comment on that?
Sure. From my perspective, and when we drafted it, we looked at precedents. And precedent says that tax bills start taking effect going forward from the time that they are passed. So I assumed that rule would hold true with this tax bill. The governor and the attorney general both disagree because of the unique nature of the marketplace fairness portion of this bill. And so when you're dealing with something new and you're relying on precedents, maybe there was some room for discussion and room to make it better going forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you mentioned, the larger issue here, of course, are those tax cuts. And so do you expect to see, or are you going to be part of something that's going to come up next session? I mean, obviously, this is not discussion that's going to go away just because this bill was shot down.
I will absolutely be involved in creating other tax cut bills, and I would imagine that the governor will see several, and I would be very surprised if he does not see one in the first month and a half of the session.
So on that discussion, like you said, that you feel like we didn't get this time around, what should we be talking about? What is the discussion about economic reform what are you talking about that we're not talking about right now that you'd like to see us talk about?
Every time, no matter if it's a Democratic bill, Republican bill, whatever the bill, I think that we should always start with the idea of what problem are you trying to address with that language. And the problem that I'm trying to address with tax reform is twofold. One, it hasn't been reformed in almost 100 years. And two, we have to create jobs in the state of Missouri. And how are we going to go about doing that? There are two schools of thought. You can attract businesses into the state and have a really aggressive method to do that, or you can grow the businesses that are here. And I believe the companies that grow here in Missouri are invested, they're, owners are parts of the community, and their likelihood of leaving is much, much smaller than a company that has been attracted to the state with dollars. The dollars then run out, and then they are saying, what are you going to give me now? Or I'm going to move to the next state that gives me money.
Okay. Representative Kelly, what's your reaction to that, the idea that we need to have these economic incentives, and would it be something that you might support ever?
I think that I was in fact part of an effort to pass a $200 million tax decrease that Representative Funderburk and I did on the Marketplace Fairness Bill. The irony of this whole thing is we could have gotten a $200 million tax decrease instead of not getting an $800 million tax decrease. When you go to the extreme, here's where you always end up. The moderate middle of this society has a way of dealing with extremes. This bill was way too extreme and therefore ultimately doesn't make it. But I think the most important thing you can do for economic development is have an educated citizenry. There's no question that if you take anything like this kind of money out of the Missouri governmental process, the place it's got to come from is education. And we already have many, many school districts in the state of Missouri that are, for example, not teaching any foreign language. No bright young couple is going to move to a community where their kids can't be in a decent elementary and secondary school system. That's true all over rural Missouri, and it is the death knell of economic development in rural Missouri. Taxes alone do not drive the debate, and we are killing our own economic development by dumbing down our schools.
So do you think that that's the way a tax cut might actually pass if it's something smaller like that? Or there's also been some speculation that it might be lumped in with something else, a larger tax cut bill I saw some speculation about Medicaid expansion being lumped together with that, or another thing that the governor or Democrats are pushing for as well, that
I would
compromise
expect
idea.
that if we do something in conjunction with the internet sales tax, we'll be able to get something real done. Because, we'll see growth in revenue from that. If we took, for instance, X percent of the growth in revenue from internet sales tax and put it toward education and mental health and things, and X percent toward a tax cut, everybody'd be on board for that probably.
Chris, I don't disagree with that, but one of the things that was very frustrating was when we were talking about the internet sales tax, the numbers that we were told were around generating $400 million. Then when we put it within my bill, the governor says it's only worth $80 million. It's very difficult to get honest discussion of how we're going to go about spending that money and creating that new revenue if we can't agree on the numbers.
It is. That's fair.
I want to take one moment to remind our listeners that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're dissecting the Missouri Legislature's veto session that happened last week and talking about what it means going forward. Joining us in studio for the discussion today, Democratic Representative Chris Kelly represents Columbia and much of Boone County in the House. Republican Representative T.J. Berry is from Kearney. His district is in northeast of Kansas City. He was the sponsor of House Bill 253. Marvin Overby is a political science professor at the University of Missouri. And joining us by Skype, Phil Brooks is the director of Missouri Digital News and has been covering the state legislature since 1972. And for you in our audience, what's your take on the legislature's failure to override House Bill 253, the tax cut bill? Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. We'd like to remind you that you can watch Intersection as streaming video online during our live conversations every Monday afternoon at 2 at kbia.org. You can watch that video and join our online chat by going to kbia.org and scrolling down to the link for Intersection. Again, that's Mondays at 2 online at kbia.org. So I wonder, Marvin Overby and Phil Brooks, you guys have been sitting patiently as we've talked about this, but I wonder your reactions on a moment ago, we were talking about how this may have been too extreme of an effort to try to get this large of a tax cut. Do you either of you, I guess, want to weigh in on that, if that may have been the fatal flaw here, aside from all the other things we've discussed?
You look at
Go ahead, Phil.
Phil?
the override effort failed by 15 Republican votes. There were 15 Republicans who voted against the override. With those 15, if they had voted with a Republican majority, the bill would have been, at least the override would have passed in the House. What's fascinating to me about this is look at the geographic background of those 15 people. Almost all of them are from rural Missouri. And I think this was another demonstration we've seen, Marvin can talk about this over the years, of the strength of education in rural local communities. There's a connection between school officials, local schools, with rural Republicans, rural Democrats, that I'm not sure the Republican leadership in the Missouri House fully understood. And I wonder about the long-term political ramifications of that. It strikes me that any kind of effort to put together a tax cut bill for next year's legislative session is going to have to accept that the impact on education has got to be an issue that's considered this next time around.
Yeah, I would largely agree with Phil on that. I mean, with all due respect, I think the Republicans handed the governor just a gift on this one. He teed off on it. If you read his veto letter, 6 pages or something like that, all these points that he brings up in the letter that he spends months going around the state talking about, the what he calls the shoddy nature of the drafting, the fact that it is going to impact potentially seniors with prescription drugs, the fact that it is going to influence how much parents of college age kids have to pay for textbooks, the fact that it impacts education for local schools. He was able to sort of put together an appeal sort of across the board to a lot of constituencies the Republicans would like to be able to claim as their own. As well as argue that Missouri is a low-tax state already, right? That was part of his appeal. And sort of arguing the basic economic theory of it, which Chris was talking about a minute ago, about what actually attracts jobs into the state. I think the governor looks back on this and says that it's rare you get all that in one bill, in one veto, and he was able to talk about a lot of his messages on this, and it was a gift.
Yeah, I guess Representative Barrett, as they're all bringing up, education is one of the things that the governor and many others around the state were harping on in their criticism of this bill. So is that something you'll have to take into effect when looking at this next time?
Sure, you have to look at that, but I sometimes wonder how much business sense the education groups have, because when you look at this on a cash flow basis, there would be $1 billion worth of new revenue brought into the state before 253 was fully implemented. The costs of the bill from the governor's office, from Senate review and House review was $800 million. 1,000 minus 800 is 200. That is a $200 million increase that this bill had to have in order for it to be fully implemented. Now,
but even the governor disputed that, right? And part of the veto letter is disputing the trigger of when this would kick in. So again, he was able to argue both sort of technicalities as well as theory and politics on it in a way that I think put him in a very strong position
He
politically.
messaged very well.
Right, he did.
He messaged very well, but facts and message often in politics are two different things.
Sure.
And I would say that
Part of the question,
Phil?
Representative, is if that message the governor sent out galvanized school districts, school officials in this state, what do you do in terms of the contents of a bill to win over education, to get their support? Because, boy, I look at how the votes rolled out on this thing, and I saw a demonstration that local school officials, local school districts have a decisive influence in the Republican caucus.
I think that if I was going to answer that, I would go back to the original 253. The original 253 and what it became after the Senate embraced it were two different things. The original 253 was really about small business and jobs, because it's great to say we're going to have a wonderful education system and we are going to educate people and give them a great foundation. But if they don't have jobs, guess what? They're going to leave the state of Missouri and they're going to go using this wonderful education somewhere else for opportunity. We have to create opportunity here, and that's the problem. How do we want to go about doing that and not talk past each other?
Let me give you two examples of why the governor's message was successful. Because moderate, middle class, even political people on the right agreed with the governor. Two examples. Peter Hershend is the founder of Silver Dollar City. He's very Republican, he's very smart, and he's very productive and very Republican. He quit the board of the Chamber of Commerce because of its support for 253 and because they brought Governor Perry in. Now, Nixon didn't trick Peter Hershend. Peter Hershend is smart enough to read and understand that, and on his own, he comes to the conclusion that the bill is very bad for public education in the state of Missouri. Another one, Don Hall, the chief executive officer of Hallmark Cards, also Republican, also very, very productive in society and very smart. He was not tricked. He came to believe on his own that 253 was bad for the state of Missouri. Those aren't guys that Nixon was able to somehow hoodwink. And they're also representative of the moderate Republicans who, if they don't stay in the tent, if the far right of the Republican Party drives people like Hershend and Hall away, we're going to see some different results behind this.
Yeah, so what does that mean for both Republicans and Democrats, I guess? I mean, if you're saying maybe we're a little less red than it's showing at the moment. Is that right?
The red-blue thing is very interesting in Missouri because if you measure it by the legislature, the state is bright red. If you measure it by statewide public officials, the state is pretty blue, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And probably the state is, depending on the election, somewhere in between.
So from the Republican and Democratic standpoint, what did we learn, I guess? What does this mean going forward after seeing, if we can put enough on what you're talking about here, how are we going to have to, are we going to have to adjust platforms a little bit?
To get a good bill, we got to be closer to the middle.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that. My job as a state representative, when I got down there and really looked at it, 80% of the job is blocking and tackling and solving problems and trying to work together. 20% is philosophical, where Chris and I are just not going to agree. So concentrate on the 80%. Try to avoid the 20% where you can.
Yeah, we did have a story over the weekend, though, where they were looking at a loyalty oath or something like that. I'm maybe overphrasing what that is, but Republicans, getting after these 15 people that voted against it, trying to, or maybe running, also talk of, running primaries against those that did break from 253. I mean, it's kind of a moment of truth in some ways.
It could be. I know that I won't be involved with primaries whatsoever, but if there were three things that Republicans are known for, okay, one is smaller government, and cutting taxes many times leads to smaller government. 2 is a strong protection of the Second Amendment. And 3 are life issues. Those are the philosophical strike points that we all are supposed to believe the same thing.
Let me throw an additional element into this, Representative, that is a question. The governor raised this issue. Is it possible that as part of next year's tax cut bill, the issue of the hundreds of millions of dollars that the state gives away in tax cuts for real estate developers would be scaled back as part of a compromise package?
It could be. That is definitely a lot of money, a pool of money that you could go after. But he hasn't had any problem giving away money to large businesses in the Kansas City area to draw them across the state line. 2 prime examples, Applebee's International and Freight Quotes. Applebee's came over last year, Freight Quotes this year, for no net job gain in the Kansas City region. To me, when we're spending money and creating nothing, that's an absolute waste of the money that we're spending. Now you can say that, well, I brought them to Missouri, but if you only moved them 10 miles, it doesn't do anything for either Kansas or Missouri. It's just money going out.
Could you accept a revenue-neutral tax cut bill in which every dollar of tax cuts is equaled by a reduction in real estate developer tax credit eliminations?
I'd be willing to discuss that without any problem. Our governor is a very skilled politician who has not been really engaging with the legislature. He waits for us to do things and then he waits to pounce on us. If we could get that communication where we're not trying to talk past each other, I think that we could get a lot done. But when you look at another bill that he vetoed, was a line item in the budget for $1 million to technical school in Pike County. We overrode that veto, and the very next day, he withholds that money. We have the power of the purse. And I think that if he would quit trying to make the political points on every issue, that really I know I want to work together.
I need to take a moment to remind our listeners that this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famueller, and today we're dissecting the Missouri Legislature's veto session that happened last week and talking about what it means going forward. Joining us in studio for the discussion today, Democratic Representative Chris Kelly, Republican Representative T.J. Berry, the sponsor of House Bill 253 this year. Marvin Overby is a political science professor at MU, and joining us by Skype is Phil Brooks with Missouri Digital News. We'd also love to hear from you in our audience. What are your thoughts on the legislature's effort in the veto session? Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. Everyone wanted to talk before I did that ID. Representative Kelly, I'll maybe give you a moment to weigh in on that idea of the governor versus the legislature.
Well,
is that the situation you see?
That override that TJ talked about, and I was proud to do it. I don't mind disagreeing with the governor, disagreeing with my political party. In fact, there's probably nobody in the legislature who breaks with his own party more than me. And I think that's pretty universally agreed. I would hope that Republicans would do the same thing, and they don't do it nearly enough. They praise the behavior generally, but don't practice it. I'd like to see a little more walking the walk than just talking the talk.
Marvin Overby, I interrupted you at the break, too.
Yeah, I was as a student of legislative practices and policies and procedures, this is fascinating for me because we have, and without getting into too much of the academic debate on this, there's a question about what does it mean to be a political party in a legislature. And we're seeing some of that play out in the Missouri House and Senate right now. You've got this large majority in both chambers of the Republicans. But as the majority gets larger, the core sort of philosophical beliefs held by all Republicans, is not necessarily that large. And then you say, well, what can party leaders do to keep their members in line? Well, a lot of the levers that were traditionally used by legislative leaders, by Lyndon Johnson or someone like that in the Senate, don't apply as much when you have a term-limited legislature, where things like long-term committee chairs or subcommittee chairs or positions in the pecking order just don't matter as much. So I think one of the things we saw this time around was that some of the Republican leaders just didn't have the leverage to hold votes on bills like 253.
Boy, Marvin, I think you're 100% right. Term limits has really messed up this legislative process, and it is. I raised the issue of tax credits because it struck me early in the beginning of this legislative session that there was an opportunity to maybe deal with a fundamental change in tax structure of the state that would include some of these tax credits being scaled back. But there's just not there's not the legislative acumen, the legislative expertise. I want to say expertise.
For the long-term interest, maybe.
You just don't have people who have been here except for obviously Chris, but you don't have people who have been here for 20 odd years who know how to put these kind of packages together and write them cleanly so you don't have bills with these enormous, huge, massive mess-ups and loopholes that provided the governor the perfect opportunity on both of the major issues in which he was sustained because they were mistakes that really weren't intended.
Representative Kelly, last time you were on the show, we talked about those tax credit reform. We've been talking about that for years now, but we talked about whether we need to parse those out piece by piece. But do you see this as an opportunity to maybe get some of that through finally?
I hope so. But here's the problem. Term limits are a huge problem and something I didn't perceive before I came back, and that is everybody knows that lobbyists and staff and bureaucrats become more powerful with term limits, and legislators become less powerful. But another group who becomes more powerful is the political parties. In the bad old days, before term limits, nobody on either side gave a damn what their political parties thought. Now they care a lot. We caucus all the time. Both parties caucus every week now, at least. In the bad old days, we caucused twice a session, and it was social, because no one would care what their party said. Now, and the parties never care about policy. The parties only care about, does this particular thing play well in the next election or not? Listening to the political parties is almost always a bad decision.
Marvin, do you think is this something specific to the situation we have now with the division of power, or is it just something that's happening in the country right now as far as legislatures go?
Well, I would disagree with my friend Chris about the role about parties. I think, and I think most political scientists would too. The parties play a very fundamentally important role in sort of organizing debates and clarifying options. I mean, I can understand the frustration of a sitting member of the House who might feel more pressure, party pressure now, to vote one way or another. But I think I would agree with Phil that I think parties have become weaker in the term limited world than stronger, and that opens up all sorts of problems in terms of thinking long term about what it is that legislators want to do with their lives and their careers, and tying their personal interests to policy interests that they're going to have to live with 10 or 20 years down the road, perhaps.
Yeah.
Now they're looking at, what's going to happen in the next election. I'm going to be out of here in a couple of years anyway, so it doesn't matter as much to me.
We'll have to continue that right after the break. This is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. Joining us in studio for discussion about the veto session are Chris Kelly, TJ Berry, Marvin Overby, and Phil Brooks. I'm Ryan Famulner. We'll be right back after this short break.